Well, the war in Ukraine is taking center stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. A lot of big news emerging over the past 24 hours, the first of which is 99-year-old Henry Kissinger. They rolled him out on stage, and he now says that Ukraine should join NATO. That's, of course, a big flip-flop on his previous position that Ukraine should negotiate peace and give up land, give up the Donbass. Well, that's concerning. And then we heard from Finland's prime minister that Putin is irrelevant, and the only way for this to end is for Ukraine to win and also retake land. Listen.
We don't know when the war will end, but we have to make sure that it will end Ukrainians win. I don't think that there's any other choice. If Russia would win the war, then we would only see decades of this kind of behavior ahead of us. I think other countries are looking very closely what is happening now in Ukraine. And if Russia would win, then it would send a message that you can invade another country, you can attack another country, and you can gain from that.
So if that's not enough, they seem to be on the same page that Ukraine has to retake its land here, all of these elites. The United States and its allies are set to increase the amount of weapons that we're sending to Ukraine. Joining us now is former UN Weapons Inspector, United States, and former U.S. Marine, Scott Ritter. Scott, welcome back to the show. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with NATO. Let's start with that point from Henry Kissinger, who a lot of people made a lot of noise about 7 months ago, when he came out and said, no, like they should negotiate peace, give up 20% of their land, be done with it, because otherwise they'll be basically eliminated as a country. Why the flip-flop, do you think, on this major point?
Well, I think only Henry Kissinger can answer that question fully, but we need to understand that, he is the name attached to a major business, Kissinger and Associates, which provides advisory and analysis support to big clients, including governments and businesses, et cetera. There's an old adage in the military that I always was reminded of when I was standing in front of senior officers explaining why what I did was right. They said, Ritter, when you're explaining, you're losing. And, Kissinger made a statement 8 months ago that was closer to being right than wrong, that Ukraine can never be a member of NATO, that process is inherently destabilizing. But the end result was a backlash that I believe hit the bottom line of his core business and business interests. Remember, he's speaking at the World Economic Forum, so it's the bottom line that matters. And for Henry Kissinger, he's no longer in the business of directly impacting national security. He's not the national security advisor. He's not the Secretary of State. He's a former, who has significant baggage. I mean, there's a significant part of the world that reviles this man, condemns him as a war criminal, et cetera. So his existence is contingent upon his ability to continue to attract attention from the establishment. And his statements that were made last summer put him at odds with the establishment. So I think, because this is incoherent. I mean, to be frank, his statement is fundamentally incoherent. It makes no sense, except when seen in the larger context of similar incoherence coming out of Europe, NATO, and the United States about this conflict in Ukraine. So he, rather than being right, has opted to be wrong, but be wrong in the right way when it comes to his economic interests. I don't think there's any real, analytical gift being brought here. This is pure selfish economic interests.
Right. And he's absolutely in a line with the other globalists and the other elites who were speaking at Davos. We heard from Ursula von der Leyen also coming out saying that we need to support Ukraine as much as possible, throw as much money and weapons there. The United States also echoing those sentiments over the past 24 hours. And then you have the Finnish prime minister also saying the very same thing. Your response to what she said about Putin is now irrelevant, and that Ukraine needs to retake its land, and that's the only way that this ends.
I don't mean to be too cute here, or too flippant, but there's really no other response, because they're not serious people. I mean, they hold serious positions, but what they're saying is so far removed from reality, so far detached from what's actually going on and what's actually going to happen, that you have no choice but to get a little cute when they respond. To me, what's happening here is a gathering of the Titanic captain and crew after they hit the iceberg, saying the iceberg is not relevant. We're going to make it to New York. All speed ahead. Meanwhile, water's coming in, the ship's sinking, and they're just saying, nope, keep on going, keep on going. That iceberg is irrelevant. No, I'm sorry, crew. The iceberg done won. And I'm sorry for all the people in Davos. Russia done won. It's game, set, match. Now, you can prolong the suffering of Ukraine, and that's all that's happening right now. The goal of, that was stated by Lloyd Austin and others last April, May, that the goal, and they were sort of honest back then, the goal wasn't for Ukraine to win. The goal was to inflict pain on Russia. I mean, right, that alone should have caused every Ukrainian to go, what, wait a minute? It's just another bit of irony. I was singled out by the Center for Countering Disinformation, Zelensky's private little intellectual hit unit, for being an international terrorist and a war criminal and a Russian propagandist, for daring to say what I say. The number one thing that I was accused of was, they listed three main things, but the first one was that I had the gall to say that this was a proxy conflict between NATO and Russia. Well, the Ukrainian defense minister just came out and said the exact same thing. So I'm looking forward to his name appearing next to mine, just like I'm looking forward. I don't have to look forward. It is Arestovich, the former advisor to Zelensky, is now on the Mirotvorov's hit list. So he and I are now partners. Me and the defense minister are partners. It seems that everybody's gravitating towards the stance that I've taken, and they're all appearing on the same list. But, besides being cute and coy about this, the point is, this has always been a proxy conflict. It has never been about Ukraine winning. So why are people suddenly now, at this late stage in the game, trying to convince people that there's a new reality, a new outcome, a new direction being taken policy-wise, when the truth is this is a proxy conflict between NATO and Ukraine, or NATO and Russia, where the Ukrainians will pay the price. NATO and the United States are prepared to sacrifice the Ukrainian nation and the Ukrainian state for the sole objective of weakening Russia, and they have failed. They have failed economically. Russia, 28% growth in its, in the income derived from energy. They were looking at, they were expecting, 15% drop in GDP, 2% drop. Remember, the entire Western world that Russia was fundamentally linked to has sanctioned Russia, broke Russia off. This should have been a precipitous collapse in the Russian economy. Instead, a 2% reduction in GDP, 28% growth in the income derived from energy sales. Inflation is literally a third of that of Europe, The Russian economy is firing on all cylinders going forward, not just firing on all cylinders, but firing all on cylinders in a way that not only sustains civilian economic growth, but they've expanded defense industry production. They are on a wartime footing right now, not only to sustain and support the special military operation, but to grow the Russian military over the next 3 years to 1.5 million men, primarily through contract services. I mean, professional soldiers, an increase in divisions, a 10-division equivalents being created, whole new army formations, etc. Meanwhile, NATO is still struggling whether or not they can get those pathetic battalion-sized battle groups in the Baltics up to brigade strength. They don't have the funding for it. They don't have the decision-making. Russia is so far ahead of them in terms of strategic thinking, and we haven't even gotten to what's going on in the SMO. 300,000 troops finalizing their mobilization, equipped with the most modern equipment, ready to go right now on the battlefield. Meanwhile, England is celebrating that they made the courageous decision to provide 14 Challenger 2 tanks, and they're now talking about bringing in Warrior armored vehicles to work side by side with Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, as if technology makes a thing. At the end of the day, it's the quality of the soldier, the quality of the soldier's training, the quality of the leadership, the quality of the staff planning. Russia owns all of those sectors. The Ukrainians are a defeated nation, a defeated military. That's the ultimate outcome, and nothing anybody says at Davos is going to change.
Well said, well said. And, we've seen a couple of major moves over the past few days, obviously near the city of Bakhmut, and the city of Soledar being collapsing now to Russian forces. Ukrainian volunteer soldiers coming out in interviews with the Times admitting that they were unprepared to fight the Russians. They said, we had a few Kalashnikov rifles and a few grenades, and that was it. We didn't have anything. We didn't have night vision goggles. We are not prepared to fight the Russians. And then, of course, you have this other report from CNN confirming what you had just said, which is that basically Ukraine is being used as a testing ground for weapons. Like, that's essentially what Ukraine is now. It's just a testing ground where these military industrial complex can now test these weapons against Russia. Is that really what the future of Ukraine is going to be? Basically one large testing ground?
No, that might be the present status of Ukraine. The future of Ukraine has been one large graveyard. I don't mean to be too grim here. This war's over. It's over. I mean, the only thing that's left is death and destruction. But, this is the equivalent. I keep trying to tell people, they're like, well, the war's not over. It's going to go on for a long time. Hey, dude, any analyst worth his or her salt would have told you in March 1943, after the fall of Stalingrad, that the momentum had permanently shifted over to the Soviet Union. But even if you had doubts about that, from September 44, after the Battle of Kursk, we now know that the Soviet Union is going to win. There's nearly another year's worth of fighting ahead, but there's no doubt about it. It's the same thing in, with the once the Allied forces ensconce themselves in Normandy, it's over. Germany can't win. There's still fighting to go. We're at the stage in the conflict right now where any strategic thinker worth his or her salt is looking at all the data, all the statistics, and realizing there's nothing that can be done to salvage Ukraine. Its economy is toast. Understand that. There is zero economic growth in Ukraine. It's all diminished. Its power, its infrastructure, gone. Even if the war stopped today, Ukraine is a hopeless train wreck that will continue to crash through into next year. This winter isn't the one Ukraine needs to worry about. It's next winter when everything shuts down. There is nothing left. So with no economy, so Ukraine is living on the largesse of the West. We keep them alive by pumping money in. I'm not talking about the military. I'm talking about the economy. And at some point in time, when Europe's economy starts to collapse on its own right, how can they continue to fund this? Is the United States, with a new Republican Congress, going to continue to throw tens of billions of dollars away when there's hurricane survivors down in Florida begging for assistance, when California's going through, flooding and storms right now that's going to need assistance? When are the American people going to say enough is enough? We aren't giving this failed regime any more money. It's all over but the shouting. Unfortunately, Ukraine has significant manpower resources that can continue to be mobilized and thrown into service, just like Nazi Germany did in the end, mobilizing the children and the old men. They kept up a fight for months longer than the war should have been fought. That's where Ukraine is right now. And it doesn't matter how much so-called equipment. I mean, what is CNN thinking? I mean, really, CNN? A testing ground for what? The Patriot? We know about the Patriot. It failed in 1991, it failed in 2003, and it failed recently in Saudi Arabia. It can't protect Saudi critical infrastructure from Houthi drone attacks. And suddenly solved all the problems, and we're going to take Ukrainian soldiers, train them in 5 months, and they become miraculous practitioners of air defense warfare with a weapon system they've never dealt with? No. We're going to give them the Challenger 2 tank. Let's say it is the tank touched by God. It is perfection of armor. It's not, by the way. But let's just say it is. 14 Challenger 2 tanks you're going to throw into the largest land combat scenario the world's seen since World War II, and they will have the life expectancy of nothing. They'll all be destroyed because 14 tanks in isolation means nothing. Oh, we're going to give them Bradleys and this. No, Zelensky said he needed 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, 500 artillery pieces, unlimited supply of ammunition. He's not getting anywhere close to this, and what he's getting are pieces of equipment that are from disparate sources. They all have unique maintenance problems, which creates sustainability issues. We're actually making Ukraine weaker by providing them this equipment than we would be if we just continued to provide them the old Soviet equipment that they know how to use. They know how to. The problem is there's no more Soviet equipment because we gave it to them all, and the Russians have destroyed it. The Russians are going to destroy this equipment too. Is it going to be cheap for Russia? No. They're going to suffer losses, but Russia will win.
That is the headline right there. We are making Ukraine weaker by giving them all of this disparate crap right now. Wow. I haven't thought of it in those terms, but that's why we have you on the show. Again, these globalists who continue to drive this country into oblivion are just, lining their pockets, making themselves wealthier. And as Russia said yesterday, it doesn't matter what you call these tanks. You want to call them tanks. You want to call them Bradley fighting vehicles. You want to call them Challenge. It doesn't matter what they are. The Russians said yesterday, they all burn the same. And
they're going to burn.
Yeah, unbelievable. Scott Ritter, always great to have you here on the show. Where can people follow? I know you've got stuff that you're doing on YouTube, of course, doing great content there as well. You're back on Twitter. Hallelujah. Where can people follow you?
No, I got kicked off of Twitter within 24 hours.
Oh,
crime unknown. I have a website. It's scottritterextra.com, and anything I write or any show that I've been on, for instance, when you send me a link, I'll go ahead and post it there so people can follow everything I'm doing there. And there's no paywall, so welcome to everybody. If you want to support, there's a mechanism to do that through Substack, but I don't. Maybe someday I'll learn how to monetize things, but for the moment, I'm still in the program that if you ask the question, I owe you an answer. So I'll do that. But as you know, nothing happens for free, and bills have to be paid. So anything, if people like it and they feel like they want to support it, there's a mechanism to do that too. But until then, it's free.
Well, we've got a large audience here, so our audience loves having you on. Please go support what Scott does, his great reporting, his great analysis. Go to scottritterextra.com and support through a Substack and subscribe. We'll have links to your work in our description below as well. So, Scott, great to see you. Happy New Year to you. Thanks so much for your analysis and joining us here on the show.
Well, thank you very much, and Happy New Year to you, and good luck going forward. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.